Click record.
I have.
Yeah.
I have.
Woohoo! You remembered. Good stuff. Yeah, welcome guys. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining on this Saturday morning. For waking up and being here. It's great to have so many of you with us. Yeah, we're gonna have Stew Talk. And as always, the Q&A button is at the bottom. So if you've got any questions throughout, then just stick it in there and we'll try and get through some towards the end. As always, Steve will now sort of chat through how he knows Stew.
I will, yeah. Morning, everyone. So yeah, I like to introduce the guests and kind of think back to when we met. And a lot of the guests I've known for 20 odd years, whereas our friendships kind of come about in the last 18 months, hasn't it? We Stu turned up on a level 1 course that Nige Quincy and myself delivered at GFA, and I remember it well because after a couple of hours in the classroom, I thought, well, we've got some big hitters here. And in the group, we had Stu, obviously a journalist, I think for The Guardian at the time. We had a lady called Suzette Davenport, who's an ex-chief constable and was also chair of the Safeguarding Children Board or something, or I call it in diversity board. And we had a couple of big hitters. I said to Nigel, we need to up our game here, mate. We need to do a bit of preparation. Not that we didn't prepare anyway. But it was a great course, and I got chatting to Stu a lot. And we kind of kept in touch because obviously I was intrigued about Stu's journalism, what he did, and was trying to get nudge, can I come along with you one day again, which I haven't forgotten. But also the fact he was a grassroots football coach and a good player in his day, which he'll tell us about. But now obviously a dad who's taken up coaching. So it's great to have you on, Stu. Thanks for waking up too early and joining us. And over to you. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So thanks for having me on. I'll talk through a little bit my sort of life story, hopefully quite quickly through the slides. So I played when I was younger, loved football, dominated my childhood, and I joined Swindon as an apprentice in 1992. John Trollope was my youth team manager, fantastic coach, really fair, honest, decent man. Can't ever remember him swearing during those 2 years, which is quite unusual in football, if we're honest, especially in that era in the 90s. But I say that in the context of, yeah, we all had so much respect for him, and he instilled a real discipline in us. And a lot of the values that John talked about in those days, I think those lads who were with him at that time have taken with us throughout our lives, really. So they were happy times, really good days in the youth team. And then I was offered a first-year pro contract in '94. Swindon had gone through quite a turbulent time at that point. So they'd been promoted under Glenn Hoddle in my first season, been relegated out of the Premier League in second season, and then they were relegated again the following season. I played quite a bit of reserve football across those 3 years, really. But when I look back now, I didn't really do myself justice in my final year. When I turned pro, I lost some of my focus. And I also think I probably lacked a bit of self-belief. And there's probably a fine line there between mentally not being strong enough, which I think would certainly be true of me at that time, and also not quite having the confidence, often going out and playing within myself, playing safe, fearing a rollicking rather than kind of embracing that situation. So I left Swindon in '95, and then I went to Bath City and had 5 years there.
Great photo.
In fact, a lot of those lads in that picture were in a similar situation to me. Mike Davis here on the left had been at Bristol Rovers, played for Rovers first team. Two along, Mike Wyatt had been at Bristol City and Bristol Rovers, and then Gareth Lloyden, who's sitting to, as I look at here, my right, but left on the photo, have been at Bristol City, and so Rob Skidmore. And that's really what, as you know, Steve, semi-pro football's about, really. A lot of lads who have had a taste of the pro game, it hasn't worked out. And I love my time at Bath. We had 2 years in the conference, or the National League as it is now, and then 3 years in the Dr. Martins Prem. And they were really good days.
Who's the guy on the left? Sorry, who's the guy on the far left? The first one on the left. Mike.
That's Mike Davis.
He seems the only one. He's a bit zoned out, isn't he? I don't think he's listening to the team talk.
No. You'll see when I'm delivering a team talk later on a photo at grassroots level, there's a lot of kids doing the same at that point. So, we had a photographer who, Ken Loach, the film director, was a director at Bath, and he wanted someone to come in and capture some sort of pictures of what it was really like. And I love that photo.
It's great.
Yeah.
The collar and tie in the background as well. That's how it was done, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly how it was done in those days. No wearing tracksuits to games.
No.
Then I joined Newport County and had 3 years there, which was brilliant fun. You know, a big club at non-league level, really, who was striving to get back to the league. I'd love to say I played a part in that journey, but I didn't, because we underachieved really during my time there. We should have been winning promotions, but we didn't. We had a good cup run that was against Blackpool, and they were enjoyable days. But at this point, really, why I sort of mentioned some of this is because there's this realization that you're not getting back into the pro game. You know, the acceptance that you're not good enough. And I'd come to terms with that. At this point in 2000, I was 25, and you know, the dream is gone. So I went through all sorts of strange jobs. I worked as a prison officer for 3 years. I can't really believe I did that, but I did anything and everything to try and get time off so I could play semi-pro football, which those people who've played semi-pro football will know is a big commitment, traveling all over the country and obviously your training nights as well. So at this point at Newport, I went back to, I'd started writing a local column for the local newspaper, really enjoyed it. And it kind of rekindled an interest I had in writing at school. And bear in mind, I'd done nothing academically for years other than the standard BTEC that you did as a YTS back in the day. So I went back to see my old English teacher who I hadn't seen for 9 years. And I said, I fancy being a journalist. Can you help me find a, you know, the right university? So we looked through various university prospectus, and Bournemouth seemed to have the best media school. So I applied there, and I remember the interview to this day because it was an oversubscribed course. And the guy said to me, well, you haven't got any A levels, and in fact, you've done nothing academic as far as I can see for the best part of 9 years. But you've got a reference from Ken Loach, and we've never had a reference from Ken Loach before. And Ken, who had encouraged me as well at Bath to do some writing for the Bath Chronicle, a sort of inside the dressing room column, was brilliant for me. And I thank him to this day. He opened doors for me, really. And then when I got to university, I worked so hard. I put my heart and soul into it. I'd given up work to go there. I was from 25 to 28, so I had a totally different outlook on university to probably a lot of students there. I wasn't going out partying. I kind of felt I'd done that at Swindon and regretted it in a way. So I sort of punished myself a little bit, I think, for that year I spoke about at Swindon when I turned pro, when I felt I didn't do enough and didn't do myself justice. And now I poured everything into university and would go and work for nothing for newspapers and during my holidays, and I went to the Observer for 6 weeks on a sort of placement, and just tried to get as much experience as I could. And at that time, coming towards the end of my sort of football, really, I signed for Salisbury, played under Nick Holmes, the ex-Saints guy, who's another lovely man. And I said, look, Nick, this is my last year at uni. If I get offered a job, I'm going to take it. And so the Guardian then came along, and I joined them as a trainee in 2004. Writing a lot of match reports in the early days. This one I pulled out. I haven't got the original on paper, but I found it online. I wouldn't want to find the original on paper, actually, because it was a night from hell for a reporter.
Was it? Oh yeah.
I think you and I, when we were talking on the course about how it works, and at night matches you have to file your copy at the final whistle. I mean, lots of my mates would say, you know, well, when do you write it then? When you get home? And I'm like, no, you haven't got time to do that. It's not going to be in the paper the next day. So I always remember this night because it's probably one of the most difficult match reports I ever did. Tottenham were playing Aston Villa. It was a Monday night, 8 o'clock. So it's a late kickoff. And it's so important. You have to hit that deadline. You know, you can't miss it. There can't be a blank page in the newspaper. And Aston Villa were winning 4-1 at Tottenham with half an hour to go. It was Tottenham's 125th anniversary. So the great and good of Tottenham were all out on the pitch before the game. Yeah. And Martin Jol was on the brink at the time. He was really fighting to save his job. So with half an hour to go, I am going to town on, you know, Tottenham having this horrendous night in front of all the famous people from the past. Martin Jol set to be sacked in the morning. And then it goes 4-2, and I'm thinking, this is still okay. This, you know, still stands. And then it's 4-3, and I'm getting twitchy now. I'm thinking, oh my God, this is like brave fight back territory. And deep in injury time, and I can still see him hitting the ball. Yunus Kabul smashed one right in the top corner, and it goes 4-4, and it's literally the final whistle.
Your heart sank.
And my heart sank, and I'm looking at the copy on my screen thinking, oh my God. To highlight a load of text, delete, start type, and then the phone's ringing from the office, which always happens, and they'll say, we haven't got your copy. And I'm thinking, well, of course you haven't got it, because it doesn't say 4-4 on my copy. And so
stop ringing me, because the more time I'm on the phone, the less time I got to write.
Exactly. So yeah, that is so true what you just said. You really do think that, guys, I can't type while you're talking to me, but that call always happens in that scenario. So yeah, it's a really high pressurized environment really at times. You've got to think on your feet, and obviously quite sort of testing. And then as sort of time went on at the Guardian, I enjoyed more and more doing interviews. That really became the part of the job that I enjoyed far more than going to matches, if I'm honest. Sitting down with someone like Ramsey here and trying to find out who the person is behind the footballer, really, Steve. Not talk football all the time. I think footballers get fed up with, the 3 points, the next game and all the rest. So trying to get them on another subject. So I went to a golf day with him actually, and afterwards he got up in the room, and I didn't expect it at all. And he talked at length about rainforests, about the environment more generally, about his love of animals, and talking about endangered species. And it was quite fascinating to listen to. It really sort of opened up another side of Aaron, really. So that kind of thing was something I enjoyed over time. This was a bit of fun with Neves and Jota at Wolves. Someone told me that they had a little cafe they used to go to, a Portuguese cafe, where they befriended the owner. So I asked them if we could meet up one afternoon there, and we sat there eating Portuguese pastries and discussing why Nuno doesn't go to any of the birthday parties they organise for all the Portuguese players and things like that. It was really good fun, and two obviously hugely talented footballers, but just came across as really lovely lads as well. Really kind of embraced parts of Wolverhampton the way that perhaps you wouldn't expect them to. And then there are interviews that stay in your mind for other reasons too. I've worked on quite a few kind of really emotional pieces. Normally, if I was doing an interview with someone, I'd probably spend the best part of a day researching them, finding out everything I can about them, reading lots of things they've said in the past. There's obviously loads of clips on, social media as well now. That's a big help for us. But with Harry that day, I went along with a blank notepad. I didn't have anything, because all I was told by Bournemouth was that he wanted to talk about what had happened with his little girl, and he'd had a stillborn daughter.
Right.
So I kind of felt research was irrelevant, really. I just sat in the room and said and let Harry talk, and he poured his heart out. It was really it was a really tough listen. And then when you write a piece like that, you obviously want to. It's like anything in life, you want to do your best, but when you're writing a piece like that, it feels like every word counts, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And not just he's going to be reading it, his partner is the families are, but they're important stories to tell, because it is the person behind the footballer, and footballers go through experiences like everyone else does in life at times. And actually, him talking about that, a lot of the comments I looked at afterwards, that there were so many parents who were really glad that he'd spoke about a really difficult issue in a way that they never felt they could, and it made them find it easier to understand their own situation in a way. So
why he obviously felt he needed to speak out. Why Guardian? Why you? Was there any relationship there with the club?
Well, I did, yes, with the club, not Harry, in fairness. Right. The head of comms there at the time, who's now at Wolves, I'd done a number of interviews down at Bournemouth at that time, and I don't know. I think they trusted me to sort of handle the interview in the right way, I guess. And with the Guardian as well, there's not going to be any sensationalism.
No,
there's not going to be a silly headline. It's. I guess there's that element of trust that people have, Steve, with certain publications, that they'll do it in the right way.
I was going to ask that, actually. Yeah, is that something you see where you do build up trust for you personally with people, with clubs, with other organisations? Is that part of it, and people come to you because they trust you to not to sensationalise it? Does that happen?
Yeah, I think that's a massive part of it. It's contact building, isn't it? And trying to. I always think with a journalist, it's easy to get someone's phone number. It's much harder for them to get them to talk to you. Contacts can be passed around quite freely, but that doesn't mean that person's going to pick up the phone. And it certainly doesn't mean if they do pick up the phone that they're going to talk to you in a way where they sort of would a best friend almost. So you have to build those relationships. Sometimes I've gone to London to meet a contact, an agent, a manager, at times with clubs, have a coffee with them, try and get to know them. play a long game. It's not about trying to get the story for tomorrow. It might be further down the road. And actually the example of that is the next one really, which was probably the hardest piece I've ever done, which was with Fernando Ricksen. And I spent 6 months trying to get this interview. It was a subject I was passionate about as well, because I lost my grandmother to MND, and it's a horrible, horrible illness. There's obviously a number of high profile people who are suffering with it now, and brilliantly raising awareness around it. So I went to see Fernando in Scotland at his hospice, and he'd been told basically that he had 18 months to live. I think that was in about 2013, and yet, you know, five years later and more, he was still fighting the illness incredibly. So I did the interview. There's a little picture in the bottom of the screen there. Fernando couldn't talk at this stage, so he would select I'd ask a question. I sat at the end of his bed, and he'd select the letters using his eyes as almost a mouse. It was extraordinary to watch, and yet through it all, I mean, anyone who knows Fernando, he lived life, God rest his soul, 100 miles an hour. You know, when he was a Rangers player, he lived life to the full, put it that way. And he retained that sense of humor, which was amazing, even in that hospice. You know, being unable to talk, being unable to move, the answers that he communicated back were just, you know, were just wonderful. Wow. So that was a really another of those interviews where, you know, emotionally it sort of takes quite a bit out of you, and you still feel that when you're writing. And I think it's okay to write with emotion at the right times. Wow. So yeah, that was a piece that kind of meant a lot to me.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And then you know, you have your moments in the job where you feel so privileged to have the position you do. The World Cup in Brazil in 2014, that was the first World Cup I did. And, you know, one of my favorite games, seeing Neymar play for Brazil in Brazil, scoring in the capital in Brasilia. That was an amazing night. And yeah, you know, really, really sort of privileged position to be able to do that. And then a couple of years later, I started, I got to know Vardy a little bit, and got to know his agent really well. And they asked me if I'd write his autobiography. So this was in the title winning season, started it about February, March time. And I remember going to see Vardy at the team hotel. They were playing in London. It might have been Palace, or Watford, one of them anyway. It was a Friday night. And I hadn't agreed things at this point. And I said, so what do you think then about the book? And he said, well, you're writing it, aren't you? And I said, well, possibly. I said, I need to know from you how much time you're going to give me. Because I'd heard stories about footballers who had basically said to a ghostwriter, here's my contacts book, go and speak to people, go and write the story. And I really didn't want to do it in that way. I was only going to do it if Vardy was really invested in it and going to give me his time. And I'd spoken to a good friend of mine who's a brilliant writer who had a lot of experience of writing books, Don McRae, brilliant boxing writer, brilliant sports writer, full stop. He'd done Gerrard's book. And I said, how much time did you have with Gerrard? And he said, I did about 18 interviews, 2 hours each. And so basically, that was what I went to Vardy with that day. And he said, well, how much time do you need? And I said, I want to do about 18 interviews across sort of maybe 6 weeks, 3 interviews a week. And he was like, yeah, that's fine. He said, I can't go anywhere anyway these days. He said, so I'm just straight home after training. And that's what I did for those sort of 6 weeks or more. I went up to Melton Mowbray on the train 3 times a week and would sit there with him at his home and talk through it. And it was a brilliant time to be doing it, because at that point they hadn't won the league. They were trying to win it. And you were on this journey with him. I remember there's only one time I stayed over, that they were playing West Ham on the Sunday in Leicester. And so I thought, rather than come all the way back and go to Melton Mowbray tomorrow, I'll stay over. And the West Ham game was the one where he got sent off. And
I vaguely remember that. Yeah,
the second booking was for diving, and he was finger jabbing.
That's right.
So I had to write a back page like for the Guardian that day,
oh, no.
Saying Vardy sent off, risking a 2-match ban by the sort of jester. So I'm thinking, oh God, I can't wait to go up to his house the next day. And actually I texted him that night and I said, look, no problem at all. Because I actually thought he wouldn't want to do an interview anyway. He wouldn't be in the mood for it. And this is Vardy, what he's like, really. He was like, well, he was like, well, what's the problem? Why would I not want to do it? I said, well, you've been sent off and all the you're going to have a band. He's like, so what? I said, come round, we'll just chat. And he was so chilled the next day as if nothing had happened.
Is that the kind of guy he is, Stu? Is he very
Yeah.
kind of just takes everything in his stride?
He is. And I think I don't know, Steve, me personally, I always like to judge someone on how they are with me, not what someone else has said about them. And so I can't speak highly enough for Jamie, really. He was amazing with his time. Seeing him at home with his kids, he's fantastic with them. It was a surreal time, really, because he got married as well. We actually ended up going to the wedding as well. It was like someone who I'd hardly known, really. And then in the way you
weren't best man, were you?
No, of course not the best man, no. And I wasn't in the best state either later that evening, I seem to recall. It was a brilliant journey and a great experience to write a book. The downside to it, if I can say, it just took so much out of me. I had to get sort of 90,000 words done in 3 months, and I was trying to do my day job as well. And I was also at the Euros that summer because it was Euro 2016. So it was a manic time, but it's something I look back on with a lot of pride. Can't thank Vardy enough, really, for the way he was with me. As I say, not everyone's like that writing a book.
And a great story. He's got a great story, hasn't he? Because you talked about your time in non-league football. I mean, he at 25, he was still in there and still aiming, I think, to get to the top, wasn't he?
That's the amazing thing. He obviously gets the opportunity with Fleetwood and then goes to Leicester. But he's 27 when he makes his Premier League debut.
Amazing.
We're now talking about a guy who scored more than 100 Premier League goals. There's only exclusive number of people who are in that kind of club. And it's fantastic, really. I do find that incredible, the length of time that he was still in non-league football. We all hear lots of stories about people getting picked up in the semi-pro game, but for him to have played that many games, for Stocksbridge, for Halifax, and then Fleetwood, is extraordinary, really.
I think I might be wrong, and you might know better. I think only Ian Wright has made his Premier League debut at a later age, I think.
Yeah, I was amazed because I was sure that Vardy would be like top of the pile kind of for that one. And then someone sent me some stats, and it's a great one. Yeah, you're right. I think Wrighty did play it might even have been the top flight as it was, however it's phrased. But yeah, you're correct. Yeah, that's the situation. But I think the great thing with Vardy is when you speak to people now. I interviewed Jamal Lowe, the Swansea striker, the other week, who's come through the non-league game. He's such an inspiration for people. Yeah. Even I'll come on to something in a minute with Bamford. He spoke about Vardy and said, the fact that he could go into the Premier League that late and score goals makes lots of other lads think, do you know what? Well, maybe I can do it too. So
brilliant.
He's an interesting one. World Cup in Russia 2018, another amazing experience. That gives you a little insight there. That photo, I included that as well as to what it's like. You can see the guy there in the red top who's tapping away on the laptop, or on the right-hand side of the screen, the guy there with the monitor with Mbappe, I think it is on there. I think it was France game. But so you have the monitor there in the press box so you can watch replays. Especially at the World Cups, the big tournaments, you're totally spoilt, really, in a way. Ethernet cables, everything's hardwired, although there's Wi-Fi, so you can send your stuff.
Stu, you call this work, do you still? Right.
Yeah. To be fair, Russia was amazing, but the one thing with Russia was the sheer size of the country, and so it was so many internal flights. You sort of lose track of where you are at times, going from game to game. But yeah, I look at that actually, and I think that's as good as it's ever going to get for me, because rightly or wrongly, I don't feel that excited about the next World Cup in Qatar for all sorts of reasons. States and Canada should be really good fun, but I'll be an old man anyway by then. So to be fair, Brazil was brilliant. Brazil was amazing. But Russia, despite all the concerns that lots of people had beforehand, I think for about 30 days in the end. I came home after England lost, although that was the only England game I did. I love covering the other nations, watching players that you wouldn't get to see ordinarily, and actually sometimes mixing with some of those supporters, which is brilliant. I remember the Peru game. Peru hadn't been in a World Cup for years, and I was walking down this street with 25,000-30,000 Peru fans just on this huge long road coming behind, all in that wonderful red and white sort of kit. And
brilliant.
They're special moments, those, really.
Great.
And then I moved to the Athletic. Yeah. So shortly after I was on the course with you, really, Steve. And I think I spoke to you about it, saying I was turning things over in my mind, whether to go or not. And the Athletic's an American company. It was, really pushing. They wanted to set up in the UK, and they recruited about, I don't know, 50, 60 of us really that summer. A big operation, and really focusing on storytelling. So more in-depth pieces really. One of the real attractions of the Athletic, and someone like me who loves to have that freedom to write, is there's no word count really on pieces. You haven't got to fit it into a certain size on a newspaper, because we're online, we're an app. So it gives you lots of opportunity to write with depth and insight and detail really, and rather than agonizing over what you might have to leave out when you do a piece for a newspaper. So this was one of my early pieces really. Brendan Rodgers, I went and spent a day at Leicester, and that headline I included, it's an interesting one from a coaching point of view really, because we were in the middle of we watched training. I was in his office having a chat, and then Dennis Pratt knocked on the door, and he'd been out of the team at the time, Dennis, and then Brendan said, "Oh, come in, come and have a little chat." And he was, explaining why I was there, kind of thing, and we were talking about Dennis's game a little bit. And then Dennis left, and then Brendan said that quote, "Silence is a death sentence for a player," and he was talking in the context of, if a player is out the team, ignoring them, not speaking to them is an absolute non-starter. You have to, retain that relationship, make them still feel that they're part of things. And I thought it was a really interesting, powerful quote, that really, which is all about the importance of communication, isn't it, really? So this was a fun piece I did on Barrow. I love this piece. It came about through, and my pieces don't normally come about this way, through being in the pub on a Saturday night. The Sutton manager was in there, Matt Gray, who's a good friend of one of my best mates, Tom Jordan, who I've told you before I coached with. And bless Matt, he just came down for a drink, and I ended up almost interviewing him in the pub that night, really like journalists do. And I was just fascinated by the non-league game, what it's like now, because I don't see it. And I said, who plays? Who really gets the ball down and wants to do almost like Guardiola style football, I guess. And I said, is anyone really doing that in the National League game? He said, go and watch Barrow. I said, go and see Barrow. So I didn't even know he was manager at the time. It was Ian Everett, and I got a number for him and said, I'd like to come up and spend some time with you. And I had 2 days up in Barrow, which, by the way, that is a journey. And I can't believe Exeter's game was called off at Barrow this week. I looked at that and thought, oh dear. But it was wonderful. It was a brilliant insight into how they were. They had some fascinating stats at the time. They were like getting 80% possession in some games. They're averaging 59%.
Wow.
And I know it's not all about possession, obviously, but what that does tell you is
at that level, those two, at that level, it's rare, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. He had like these, what he talked about, non-negotiables, like playing out from the back. They almost had to do it. And Rooney's brother was there, John, and it was great fun. I watched him train on the Friday. I went to the game on the Saturday. He let me come in the dressing room before the game, half-time, after the game, hear everything. It was like access all areas. And that was a fun story to tell, because I felt as if there's nothing better as a writer when you're writing about something that you think maybe a lot of people don't know the story, they don't know much about. So that was good. That was good fun.
Barcelona.
Yeah, that's what he said there. People were calling them Barcelona.
Oh, okay. You didn't come up with that then. You can't, no, can't take the credit.
No, I wouldn't. I'm not creative enough to come up with stuff like that, Steve. And we do sort of lots of pieces like that. We did before the pandemic, try and do have a bit of a day in someone's life. And this was with Luke Matheson, the young lad who scored for Rochdale as a 16-year-old, still at school at Man United.
Wow.
And so I went to school with him. I went up, knocked on his, I got to, obviously made contact before. And then I said, okay, I'll come and watch a game at Rochdale. And then knocked on the family front door, 7:45 on the morning, got on the bus with him, went to school. And he's obviously at Wolves now, just gone on loan to Ipswich. But that was a really interesting day to see how a young lad who's playing first team football while still doing his A-levels, and his mum, bless her, Ros, is what I didn't know, but what they talked to her in the interview, she's had a really tough time with serious illness, and to see how a young lad had been coping with all of that. Wow. And they're a lovely family. I can't speak highly enough of them. So that was a really enjoyable piece to do, and giving an insight into what it's like for a young lad trying to break through, really.
Right.
This was an interview with Bamford, who was talking about dealing with criticism. This was about November time this year. I've sort of followed Patrick's career with interest. He divides opinion. I've got so much time for him. He's a lovely lad. I don't know why, because I didn't go to private school, but I don't know why people have a hang up about some footballers who did go to private school. It's weird that I find that really strange.
Almost like it's not. You should be a working class lad. That's the game. Is that?
Yeah, it is that. How outrageous that he plays, grade 7 violin kind of thing. Well no, what's wrong with it? It's it was really interesting. He was very open, talking about the criticism he'd had from Leeds fans as well. It wasn't just from outside, and how he's come through that. That was the interviews are great. As I said before, I really love doing those. And it's not always about having the most high profile name, Steve. It's about someone who's got an interesting story. Excuse me. Joe's another lad who I really like as a person, not just as a footballer. Obviously at Forest, and I've been in touch with Joe for a little while. And that day we went for a walk with his dog, and then the three of us, the dog as well, ended up at the pub later in the day. And
hang on, there's a theme developing here, Steve.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I was only drinking orange juice, honestly. So what was interesting there was what I say to you really about trying to get someone to talk openly. It's not going to happen with a phone call, when you don't know them. And that Joe was talking about losing confidence really, and what that feels like for a footballer when you get to that point. And that was how he said that quote. He just stopped, and then you just get to a point where you don't really want to. And I could see him thinking, and he said, play. Right. So when everything that suddenly felt so natural, and you do subconsciously without thinking, your touch, your pass, your next move suddenly becomes really hard to overthink and everything, and it all falls away. And I think we all know confidence is a massive thing in sport, and to get someone openly talking about that, which he did at length in that interview, was really interesting, because a lot of players probably wouldn't want to admit to that, but they would be feeling what he said. Mental health's a massive thing. This is an extraordinary story, really. Dean was a professional with me at Swindon in 1995. Well, we got back in touch. I saw some stuff he was posting on Twitter, and I dropped him a line, and we ended up speaking. And I went along to see him for this interview, and I came away thinking, my God, I didn't even know you in the first place, really. I thought I knew you. It turned out that before he signed for Swindon, he'd been in a mental hospital. He'd been sectioned, had huge issues around mental health, bless him. And now he's doing amazing work on, you can find him on Twitter, amazing work helping people in football around mental health, which is obviously such an important issue. And the things we were talking about that day, we were saying, what would have happened if you'd spoken about them then in the 90s? And well, sadly, people probably wouldn't have had any time for what he was saying. It'd have been that whole pull yourself together kind of thing. And thankfully, times have moved on. But
so I think, sorry, Stu. Did he go on to play for Peterborough United? After?
He did. Yes, he did.
I used to watch him, and he was a very hard right fullback, I think.
That's correct. Exactly.
And I think he may have even had a bricklaying company or something like that. But like you say, he's not your stereotypical guy who's going to suffer from mental health. I mean, that guy would have tackled his granny. That.
Oh my God. And actually, in the dressing room at Swindon, I always used to think, he's quite lively, Dean. Do you know what I mean? You knew if, in fact, at one of his early training sessions at Swindon, he come in on trial first of all, and he was full on.
Right.
He was not holding back in any way, to the point that people were saying, like, what's your game, mate? What are you doing? But that was Dean. It was a part of his character, and it's part of his desperation, obviously, to impress. And anyone who's been on trial anywhere will know what that's like. You got to go full tilt, really. But you're right. You wouldn't have, in a way, it's kind of hard to reconcile the story I'm telling with the person who you perhaps watched on the pitch. Which in a way made it all the more interesting. Now we're good mates again, and we keep saying, when the pandemic's over, we'll get back together. But yeah, that was an interesting one. But I thought I'd include this one for people. Obviously, there's a lot of people who are listening who are passionate about coaching, that kind of thing. And a parent had got in touch with me who I know, whose son's in an academy in London, and said, Stu, there's a really interesting piece to be done on one-to-one coaching. He said, my son's one of those being trained, and this appealed to me, one, from a journalistic point of view, but two, from a coaching point of view as well. I was quite intrigued by it, because actually I was really skeptical about it in my mind before I'd seen it. I was sort of thinking, one-on-one, really? How can you relate that to a game? We all work it with small groups at times, but one-to-one I couldn't really see. But actually going there, And the photo is probably not a good example because that was an extreme case of a very young boy. A lot of the lads I was working with were sort of 13, 14, 15. They were in academies, and he was obviously doing work to kind of complement that in a way. I see it was at Tottenham as a young pro, and I mean, technically he's unbelievable. He's a body double for Messi. So that gives you an insight into like how good he is with the ball kind of. And watching him coach several sessions, I was so impressed, and it totally changed my view on one-to-one coaching. I actually went to see another guy called Sol Isaacson Hurst, who's got the
I know,
MyFootball app.
I know of him. Yeah.
Sol was coaching Fulham right back. Sorry, it's funny actually, because I said to him, I said, how do Fulham feel about you being along here? And he said, well, they don't know. And I said, well, they're gonna know now because I'm writing about it for this article. So yeah, obviously it's something that pros do, and those guys were saying to me they coach some Premier League footballers in their back garden.
Wow.
And I was staggered by that. And he said, but you have to understand there'll be things that they won't feel comfortable doing in front of their teammates on a training ground, shooting with their weaker foot for 45 minutes for an hour, making mistakes in front of people, some people putting a little clip on YouTube of something silly going on. Suddenly they can do that in their back garden, where obviously they've got the facilities to do that, like a lot of us haven't. But I found that quite fascinating that that was happening. So it was an interesting piece to explore that around.
I'd never thought of that. I'd never thought of that, actually, that not wanting to make mistakes in training. It's fascinating. You're dead right, aren't you?
Yeah, and the other thing actually that the Fulham lad said, which was interesting, I thought it was sad to hear this, but also that I thought it was sad that it still existed in a way, because it certainly would have done in the 90s, where people would mock you for staying out after training doing extra. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that's prevalent everywhere, but he spoke about that, and there would have been an element of that, were you being busy, that kind of thing back in the 90s. Whereas actually my biggest regret, or one of many regrets, is that actually I didn't stay out. And I think, why did I have to leave the training ground at 1 o'clock, go and do nothing? Why didn't I stay out for half an hour? One of the other lads working on my weaker foot. But
because you were 19, 20.
That's the thing. If I knew then what I know now,
exactly.
Steve, live our life by that rule. Piece on Team Talks here, which was, I've included this because it's actually changed how I do team talks with kids as well, through listening to people. I spoke to 8 coaches, and you've obviously got to be very, very careful what you take from people working in the pro game and applying to grassroots. I'm not ignoring that, but there are certainly little things that you can kind of learn from. And I think this was an anniversary of John Sitton, the Leyton Orient guy who obviously
legendary.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously quite a watch, that one, in a few expletives. But anyway, I spoke to managers across all levels. In fact, Lee Johnson was one of them at Bristol City I talked to, and whether the hairdryer was still in use. He used the phrase horse whisperers, where he talked about, going up in someone's ear and saying something quietly, or he said, yeah, the hairdryer can be used, but it must be used sparingly and at the right time. And knowing the right person as well that you can kind of use it on. And what I found interesting was, I think one thing I used to do with grassroots is talk too much after a game. You're sort of processing the game, and you almost want to go through it and relive it with the boys. And what a lot of managers were saying here was the importance of really half time. You've got a moment. You've got chance probably to make a maximum of 3 really good points. Any more than that, and they're not going to be taking them in. Nearly all of them would give the players 2-3 minutes on their own. They let them talk, say what they wanted, almost to unwind a little bit at half time. And then they'd go in with their short, sharp observations, really. Full time, there was a feeling that actually it was pretty futile saying much, and that messages would be lost. It was still a really emotional environment at that time. And the best thing to do was say very little. No point being overly critical. It wasn't going to help the situation. You'd then have to go in and face those players on Monday morning if you've absolutely slaughtered them in a moment when you're, raging and annoyed. Now, I'm not saying you get raging annoyed with grassroots, but there's that certainly that thing where you can talk too much, I think, afterwards. And actually, so I now sort of say very little to the boys at the end of the game. I always try and be positive in my feedback, even if it hasn't been particularly good, because I think at that point there's no real value in what they're going to do, take that negativity home, and what they're going to do with that. And if you're going to try and be constructive with some criticism, maybe the best time is when you're next at training and you just say, look, this little situation the other day, I thought maybe we could have done that better. So that, for me, informed my thinking around stuff. I played with Adi, Tyrone's dad, at Bath. When the ball went up front to him, it usually stuck, I've got to be honest. Lovely man, great guy. He's a scout for Chelsea now. And this was an interesting piece through getting to know players' dads over time, and they can be really useful contacts. And actually, as time goes on, they're my age, not the players. That's another thing that shifts the longer you become a journalist. Yeah. I found this quite fascinating. I got to know Joe Rodon's dad pretty well. He was obviously at Tottenham now, and I'm a Swansea season ticket holder. I even stood with Kerry, his father, at a few games and could see how he was living and breathing every moment of that match. And so I was interested to write a piece around what it's like. And these guys, these fathers were talking about, and mothers, talking about that journey from academy football, all the emotions you go through as a parent along the way. And it was a really good insight. I know from people who work in academies that parents can be a pain in the backside at times to some of them, and they find them difficult to manage. And I understand that. But this was kind of looking at it from the other side as well, and what that feels like. And actually, when you get to professional level as well, when you've made it, but it's even harder in a way, because then your son is in the public eye in a way they never were before, and it can be pretty unforgiving.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Topical for pieces, this is a massive issue at the moment, obviously, in football. Social media abuse. I mean, let's be honest, Steve, it's out of control. I found it really, really disheartening yesterday to see Facebook's response to Jan Dander being racially abused, which was, basically saying, putting the person who did it on the naughty step and just saying they can't send any messages.
Yeah, I saw that. It's incredible, isn't it? Actually, I think I saw your response to as well.
Yeah, I think I just did pathetic. Yeah, I was really, upset by that. And Dan James, this was a Europa League game. I think it might have been the night they went out, United, during the pandemic last year, and he'd only been on literally 2-3 minutes, and he was trending on Twitter, and then you look at the comments, and they're just absolutely slaughtering the guy. So I thought I'd write about that, really, how social media abuse has kind of got out of control. I mean, I hope a lot of footballers don't. In a way, I was speaking to someone about this the other day. It's sad to say, I almost do not see any value now in a young footballer being on social media. I don't know what there is to lose outweighs what there is to gain in my eyes, which is a sad thing to say.
Interesting. This morning, still, I make a cup of tea every morning. I scroll through Twitter. That's the new newspaper for me. And the lad Norwood, Ipswich Town, has responded, because they don't often respond. He's responded to a fan. He obviously just got to his wit's end, and just responded, a witty response. But of course, that then escalates the whole initial tweet, and it's all over. And I'm finding myself reading it and thinking, oh God, and some are supporting him for responding, others are saying it's unprofessional. He obviously got to his wit's end and thought, I'm not having this. Like you said, I would think I'd be on it if I was a professional footballer.
No. And I think, probably a lot of the accounts are managed by agencies and things like that. But even so, like I said to a player a while back about that, and he said, but the thing is, he said, my parents read it. And there's that little moment where, you like it in anything you do. There won't be many people who haven't Googled their name at some point and seen what comes up. Well, for a footballer, it's that thing, and this is what players have talked about to me, of being in the dressing room after a game. And Mourinho posted that picture, didn't he, a little while about the modern game, and they're all on their phones. And they're looking at Twitter and thinking, they will type their name in and see what's being said about me. I'm not saying they will all do that, but some will. And certainly the young players who really have been brought up as part of that sort of social media generation and around probably getting a lot of positivity as well through their younger years, when an under 18 match report is only going to say good things, obviously. And then all of a sudden being in that first team environment, which is so unforgiving, putting their name in and in cases almost being in tears looking through the stuff, and then that affects your game. So it's a really big issue, that, and one that's not going to go away. This was great fun, Steve. I'm not a rugby fan, but we, during lockdown, we were finding ways to be creative around matches, and Eddie Jones agreed to watch a game with me remotely.
Right.
He was in Japan at the time.
Wow.
And we watched Arsenal Brighton, and obviously I wasn't wanting him to talk through the game, but try and talk through that. I put there learning from other sports. There's so much, isn't there, we can learn from how other coaches operate. And Eddie was fascinating that day. I've included a little story, actually. We went on to talk about one-to-one individual discussions and how important they are for, player development and how to bring the best out of people. So there's this story of Ben Youngs, the England scrum half, and Eddie calls him into his office and basically thinks he needs to lose some weight, needs to get, leaner, lose 4 kilos. And Youngs accepted this. He was, he accepted, he wasn't sort of arguing with what Eddie had to say, but he wasn't prepared for what Eddie Jones did, which was he was saying this, and he gets a bag of sweets and just threw them across the table to him. And Youngs spoke about this subsequently and said that he came out of the meeting like really admiring Jones for being honest and for using a bit of humor to get his point across. And then it was interesting here, and I was like, what's your thought process behind this? And he says that's one of the reasons you coach, because you want to see players improve, and the conversations you remember are the ones that had an emotional tinge to it. You don't remember things that don't bring out emotion. He said every time I'm talking to a player, I'm thinking, what's the emotion I need to bring out here for this to be a meaningful conversation? And this is, I can't do his Aussie accent, but sometimes you've got to dig them, sometimes you've got to love them, and sometimes you've got to talk about other things. It might be their family to get the right response, and sometimes it's tough love. And then I went on to ask him. I said, what did you think he was going to do when you threw him those sweets? And then he just started laughing. He said, well, I was hoping he wasn't going to take them with him, mate.
Yeah.
a great response. And he said, no, I thought I'd annoy him, which I did. Just looking at the last 5 years, I think he'd have played 80% of tests and so on. And this was funny. He said, there's always a bit of risk with that kind of thing, but you've got to be prepared to take a risk to get a result. He said, there was another guy whose name I won't give out. And I said, you like a drink, mate? So here's a carton of beer. And he took it away with him.
Oh dear.
So, but that was fascinating. We can learn so much from other sports. Years ago, I sat in on the pro license at the FA, and they brought in Tony Smith, rugby league coach, to talk. And you could have heard a pin drop in that room, Steve, for that hour. He was fascinating. He lost his first 13 games as a coach on the spin, and which generated a debate about in football, would you be able to survive that kind of thing? But he talked about how he came through that. He talked about the power of silence in team meetings. When you throw it as a manager to the floor and say, come on, lads, what do you think? And no one answers, and how to deal with that. So I think there's so much, we can glean from talking to people who work in other environments. And here we are. Grassroots football. Yeah, as you said at the start.
The blonde lad.
So look at the one you need to look at really is with the blue boots on, which is my son, who could not look more fed up with what's being said. I mean, if ever there's a caption like I've heard this a million times.
I've heard this before, Dad.
That is absolutely it. So I did check with all the parents, by the way, we could use that photo. So I did I told you that day, I think I did my prelim in 1994, my FA prelim. As you did as part of the apprenticeship back in those days. Really enjoyed it. Coached in Swindon Centre of Excellence for at least, a year, 18 months. Loved it. Really, really enjoyed it. Probably with kids about that age, they're under 10s. And I'll be honest with you, I really, really regret not staying around coaching. I've loved journalism every moment of it, and I've just ran through all the reward and enjoyment I've taken from it. But I think going back into coaching, which started about 5 years ago, I find it's all voluntary. I coach 3 nights a week, sometimes 4, and that includes the weekends, and just find it so enjoyable, and it makes you think also about the people who gave up their time to help you when you were a kid, which perhaps you don't always think about in that moment. But when you're loading the car up with footballs and discs and bibs and all that kind of thing, and you think about the people who were doing that for you, and so it's great fun. I loved your level 1 course. I would have done it before if I could have found time. And I was like speaking to you there that day saying, when can I do level 2? My football career wasn't particularly successful, but I say that in the context of there's not a single part of me that thinks, do I have to do these coaching qualifications? I'd love to go all the way through and learn as much as I can, learn from people like you, but also learn from the other people on the course. There's loads of little things that I've done along the way that I thought, look back on and think, oh, I could have done that better. It's just a great experience.
I mean, I don't know the full context of this, but with my coach education hat on, there's potentially something more interesting behind you. So there's potentially something going on. So next time, if you have your back to the fence, then there's not, there's probably not anything interesting behind you. They're probably distracted by the games going on. Just a bit of feedback, free of charge,
We've had it a few times that where we've stood there and then you realise and then you're like, boys, and then you sort of,
you look around and there's a match going on.
And then they've got nothing to look at. But to be honest, it's probably not even down to that. It's probably nothing going on there. They just genuinely are bored by me going on like I am. So
that's brilliant, Stu. Libby, I think there's a couple of questions and comments. So you're right to give.
To be honest, I've literally just been like, so I haven't looked. I will look now.
We're not doing your job properly then. Come on.
No. I've just been fascinated. This is incredible. Yes, there are questions.
Unbelievable.
One from Graham Fletcher here. Do you find, as most managers and players are media trained, that when you interview them, they don't necessarily answer your question in a way that you'd expect? How do you get them to fit into the piece that you want to write?
Yeah, that's a really good question from Graham. And there's a great example, actually, a very recent one. That I don't know if you saw the Maddison interview that he did.
Yeah.
When he spoke in a way that footballers don't normally speak after a game. The thing is with what Graham's saying now, I think it's very hard on TV straight after a game to get someone in that little 2-3 minutes. I mean, some of those, the quotes I'm getting from those pieces I mentioned have come from spending 2 hours with someone, so you've got a lot of context to how they've come to talk about something very openly. But yeah, you have kind of got to chip away at things at times. I think there's probably too much media training with some of the footballers now who will trot out that, long list of kind of cliches that we all know, one game at a time and all that sort of thing. And that's why Maddison was so refreshing the other day. But it's funny speaking to someone at Leicester because they've caught on to it already now, and they think that broadcasters are going to make him man of the match, even when he's not man of the match, because they know that they'll get brilliant sound bites from him afterwards, and everyone will be captivated by a guy who comes out saying, yeah, we noticed that they switch off on corners and, and that kind of thing. But it's a challenge, that, and it's, you get better through time, really. I always have quite a, as well as doing my research, have a list of things on my notepad normally that I want to try and talk to them about. But you have to be prepared as well that someone might suddenly take you off on a tangent, and the importance of listening to the answer and not in your mind. You're always thinking as a journalist, what's my next question? But actually you can then miss a really good answer that you get that you should have elaborated on through, worrying too much about what you'll ask next, if that makes sense. But the media training is a hard one because yes, I can be critical of clubs doing it, but also there's lots of pitfalls, isn't there, for young players in terms of saying something and how it can be spun. My industry hasn't got a great reputation at times, and I wouldn't shy away from that. There's certain things that are done and you look at it and think, oh my God, that headline, that wasn't the context of how he said it, so they need media help. But I think you also really want to see a player's personality come out in an interview, and it's great when that happens.
Great stuff. There's one from Gary here. Stu, you shared some amazing stories this morning. What do you feel has been the best piece of work you've done, and what do you think was the most important for whatever reason that may be?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It's probably, the Fernando Ricksen piece would be one of them. There was another one that I didn't include actually, which was about Abdelhak Nouri, who's the brilliant young Ajax player who was really was the star in that team with, De Jong, Van der Beek, all those who were coming through. And Appy, as he was known, or is known, I should say, collapsed on the pitch in a pre-season friendly. And they weren't able to treat him in the best way possible at that moment. And he ended up with severe brain damage. And so, he's just such a beautiful kid as well, the most lovely person. All the things he would do away from football, in his community in Amsterdam were just were amazing. So I went to that was an interview I've been trying to do for a long time with his family, and I went to Amsterdam and met one of App's brothers, and yeah, another of those stories that you really get immersed in and consumes you really because you're emotionally wrapped up in it as well, you know. And I went to Ajax, the training ground, spoke to some of his old coaches. At that time, it was still too raw for his teammates to talk about it. I mean, they still had his boots in the. They wouldn't move his boots from under his locker in the changing room all that season, and his shirt was still hung up. So, yeah, if you watch clips of Nouri, Abdelhak Nouri on YouTube, and I still do it now, his talent is unbelievable. He's a little number 10, nothing of him, looks a bit like Xavi in kind of his build. And yeah, all the top clubs in the world wanted to sign him. And I found it really hard personally watching that amazing Ajax team get to the semi-finals and get all those plaudits and think Abdelhak Nouri should have been in that team. And yeah, so Van der Beek wears 34 at Man United because of that.
Wow, really?
He's his best friend. And one of App's brothers plays for the same amateur team where Van der Beek, that literally backs onto Van der Beek's house in Holland. So the families are still really, really close. So yeah, that was a story that I look back on with all sorts of emotions, really. But yeah, proud to have sort of written it in the way I did, if that makes sense. I've got this elite training one. Do you want me to show that? Or not?
Well, we've only got 1 minute left, Stu.
Oh my God, we've gone over 10 o'clock.
We're supposed to talk about what happens in elite training, and it's 10 o'clock already. You have to come on again.
Please carry on.
No, you have to come on. I've got a meeting at 10. I need to count.
I can't believe the time's gone that quickly.
Oh, mate, it's been great. Tim just said keep going. We can't. I'm so sorry. You have to come on again, Stu.
I'd love to.
There's a great comment here which sums it up, to be honest. And somebody's put, Stu, I think if we were in the room this morning, if you were in the room this morning, we would be able to hear a pin drop. This has been riveting and a great insight into your journey. That is so true.
We'll have to do a part two. We'll have to do a part two, definitely.
What an incredible webinar that's been. Thank you so much. Yes, definitely come back on.
I'd love to. Thanks for having me on anyway, and it's really nice to see you, Libby, and nice to see you again, Steve.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Stu. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks for joining us.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.